Okay. I think we're live and on the main stage. So good afternoon, everyone. Buon pomeriggio to everyone from Milan or from Mainz, and good evening or good morning to all of you over the world. Here we are again on the main stage of e-Rum2020, and here we will have our last keynote speaker, which is Kelly O'Brien, and help me welcoming her to this beautiful venue. Hi, Kelly. Good morning for you in Portland, Oregon. Kelly, hi. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm holding on. We are almost at the end, and we are all kind of exhausted, but we are still excited. So caffeine, and adrenaline keeps us up. So a few words about Kelly. Kelly is a solutions engineer, which turned to product manager at Rstudio. Her work has been focused in configuration and workflow management with a tiny or a big bit of passion for our administration, and she's been delivering a lot of enterprise-ready professional products. I just found out recently that so even if her background is mostly on data science and software engineering, we coincidentally share a common formation in bioinformatics. So actually, she has a formation in bioinformatics, and I do work in that. So it's just the first coincidence, because I really have another surprise for you, Kelly. I told you that in advance. I was an early buyer of this.
No way.
Yes way. So for those of you who don't know what this beauty is, this is a 3D cookie cutter, and that was the first time that I probably got in touch with you. So I still found out your email when I was checking out my email with you. So that was a surprise. So I've seen no impressive picture of your childhood, so nothing to be ashamed of. So Kelly's been a wonderful figure in the whole R community back then. So starting up the Our Ladies global movement as well. And yes, from that moment on, I just saw a lot of compelling tasks from you about automating data product delivery at USAR, and not just that. Okay, I will be sharing your session, and I will be playing a mellow meowing sounds from my computer to notify that we will have 3 minutes left. And to all of you viewers, you can go to Slido, enter the event code e-Rum2020, and ask or upvote question for Kelly, even while she speaks, and I will be collecting them afterwards. So today, we are all set to listen to your talk, Kelly. It will be entitled R in Production, Reflections on 2 years of Solution Engineering at Rstudio. Take the stage and entertain us, please.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen here, and now we should be good to go.
Okay, I'll disappear. Stage is yours.
All right, thank you. So I want to first off thank all the organizers and congratulate them for making this conference happen. I am so impressed with what they put together, so thank you. I know the past several months have been really hard for everyone and for the world, and so I decided to focus my talk today on reflection and encouragement. I've spent the last 2 years thinking about R in production as I've worked as a solutions engineer at Rstudio, and I just recently transitioned into a product management focused role. So this seems like a really good time for me to pause and think back on what the last 2 years have really meant to me. So first off, I wanted to give a quick tutorial on what solutions engineering actually is. I like to describe it using this kind of complex diagram, but in simplicity, Rstudio solutions engineers really wear a lot of different hats. A large part of my work involved helping data scientists and administrators at other organizations get unblocked. We have this big growing user base in a large number of data-heavy industries who all have slightly different goals and challenges when they use R in Rstudio. So when I talk to users, I get to ask a lot of really interesting questions, like what is there to learn here? What are the needs? What are your problems? And then I help synthesize those responses in such a way that we at Rstudio can provide better tooling and innovation to those teams. So I get to interact with organizations in all stages of the R in production maturity timeline here. Some teams are over here on the left, still trying to get R legitimized at their org. They have it they want it to be recognized as a supported part of their official software stack. Some teams are more in the middle. They're grappling with their IT groups. They're working through resistance as they try to upscale those teams. And other groups are like fully bought in. They're ready to integrate R across many parts of their org, and they face unique and interesting challenges here as well. At the heart of all of this activity is often one person that I get to interact with. At Rstudio, we like to call this person the R admin, but a more general term might be analytic administrator. And this is somebody who is invested in continually improving their analytic infrastructure. They advocate for the best practices in data product deployments, and they act to adopt data ops philosophies in the organization. This person is trying to unblock their team, and they're often taking on the burden of doing this kind of alone. There are a couple times in my career when I've felt entirely alone doing this. Before I joined Rstudio, I worked for a large tech company, but in a role where I had very, very little access. And yet I had these huge dreams of making a really big impact there. And so I created some change that I was proud of. But each of those tiny little molecules of success that I achieved made me want more and more. And eventually I turned into basically a huge menace. I tested any boundary I could find, and I knew that the infrastructure I wanted for my team was available there, and yet I wasn't allowed to have it. I wasn't trusted with it, and that drove me crazy. So I decided to never be in that position again, and I joined a tiny, tiny startup. And I thought that there I would have all of the access and all of the influence I ever wanted. It was such a small place that my ideas couldn't go ignored, I thought. And yet I was wrong again. My experience at a tiny startup was that there were not enough resources to do anything the right way. I never had the time I needed to complete last week's daily work, let alone improve today's. So it was super exciting at times and utterly soul-crushing at other times. Rstudio Solutions Engineering is where I actually found my community. It sounds really cheesy, but it's true. This is what I say when people ask me what it's like to work at Rstudio. And as a solutions engineer, I get to help people just like me in my past lives and careers navigate the ins and outs of making an impact at their organizations through the use of R and Rstudio software. And it's been amazing. I love it so much. But it's also sometimes frustrating because I know how hard it is for those R admins who feel like there is no clear path to accomplishing what needs to be done. I read a novel last year that really captured the visceral feeling I'm talking about here. In this scene, the main character, whose name is Maxine, is a developer, and she's trying to improve how development work gets done on her project in a crucial, critical way that she knows has to happen. But everything she tries fails. Progress seems impossible, and she's at her wit's end. This pull quote I love so much. She buries her head in her hands and silently screams at her keyboard. What I think I'm talking about and trying to describe here is actually trauma. It's an experience tied to a severely painful emotion. But I think there can be redemption. And I really like this quote. I included at the bottom from Benjamin Hardy. If you're going to create a powerful future, you'll experience failures, heartaches, bad days, and pain along the way. You need a team of empathetic witnesses. You need people to encourage you to keep going, to encourage your work when others don't understand. As a solutions engineer, that's what I've tried to do for other admins, folks who are on that R and production journey. And if all I've accomplished over the last 2 years is offer a few people encouragement that they needed in a tough time to keep going, I think that's pretty cool. But today I want to take it one step further and see if I can offer you some things to consider along the way as well. I didn't just bring up that Unicorn Project book as a random aside. I actually want to talk about it a little and discuss what it could potentially mean for us in the data science community. I mentioned that it's a novel, which is kind of silly because it's a work of fiction, but it's also a really cathartic story. My colleague Alex and I like to joke that it's like a trashy romance novel for DevOps, for developers in IT, but without the romance. And I don't think I'll ruin the book by telling you that the main character, she does end up finding that team of empathetic witnesses I was referring to. And together they do great things. And along the way, they discover these 5 ideals that help them achieve the kind of digital transformation their organization needs super desperately. I found that most R users don't spend a lot of time today thinking about DevOps. The term DevOps even has become very confusing lately. It's often referred to as an actual job title. But the more I learn about it as a philosophy and a discipline, the more I'm compelled to socialize it. So I want to use the remaining time I have to introduce you to the first ideal and try to convince you that these things may be handy to think about when you're navigating your R and production goals. So let's talk about the first ideal. This is all about the extent that teams, or even the smallest unit of value in an organization, can use to independently develop, test, and deploy value to customers. In an ideal world, an engineer and team can work on their own, in their own area and space, to get everything they need done. In a non-ideal scenario, this is the opposite. You have to coordinate with many teams and many people to get any one tiny thing accomplished. The non-ideal is commonly illustrated with this classic DevOpsy diagram of a developer and an IT handoff. So in this scenario, a deployment of code involves multiple teams. Everyone exists within their own silo. And it creates a lot of opportunities for the parties involved to feel used and abused, thus inciting a vicious cycle of mutual resentment and mistrust. So now let's think about our users. Do we think that as data scientists, we can independently develop, test, and deploy value to customers? Should data scientists be trusted with this responsibility? Who are the customers in this situation? What does deploying value actually entail? This first ideal, also created by Gene Kim, has been described by him as the degree to which teams have capabilities and the authority to get what they need done. I'm going to argue for the rest of this talk that data scientists can do some of these things, within reason, within certain organizations, as long as we go about this in the right way. And that's what I think R in production is all about. There are some challenges for the R user. I've already spoken about some of the organizational challenges that I see day to day. We have challenges just making R a legitimate part of software toolkits and stacks within organizations. There are organizational challenges that come along with just working with IT groups in general. But the ones that are within our personal control are on the technical side over here. We don't often have, as data scientists, the right level of experience and education and exposure to do some of those things that were mentioned in the previous slide. So how do we get those skills? How do we upskill our education so that we're able, as data scientists, to feel confident independently developing, testing, and deploying value? Well, I've spent a lot of time over the last year focused on giving talks and webinars on the concept of Shiny in production. And this is one of my favorite slides that I developed over the last year, because I use this metaphor of comparing production development to prototyping or local development. And I say that local development is like developing an hour-long talk. You have a lot of space to explore and do different things and try out different concepts. And it's a really great learning experience to develop a talk that's an hour long. You can fill it with all sorts of things, but the end product tends to be a little rambling and cluttered. There are parts that work well, there are parts that work not so well. And so in the end, you're not quite sure what you have. Conversely, production development, you should be aiming to produce something more like a lightning talk, like a 5-minute talk that is targeted, elegant, streamlined, and optimized. So your production Shiny deployment should be all of those things too. You'll notice that this talk is 30 minutes long, so somewhere in between. Hopefully it has little bits of both of these. But maybe we should take even one more step back and think about what production is at all. I really like this definition that Joe Chang used in his Shiny in Production keynote from Rstudio Conf 2019. He said, what is production? Well, production is software environments that are used and relied on by real users with real consequences if things go wrong. So that can take many different forms. I put together Shiny applications and reports built in R all the time, and I push them out onto our Rstudio Connect servers because that's what we do at Rstudio. And those reports and applications are used by other folks at our organization, my teams. I wouldn't call them production, but under this definition, maybe they are. They get to be relied on by other real users, my teammates. And once they're relied on by someone, there tends to be real consequences if those things break and something goes wrong. So we can practice getting better at not only Shiny development, but R development in general, whenever we start to think about producing something that may be used or consumed by someone else, even if it's only an internal audience. So one of the real gems out of that Joe keynote that I'm referencing here is a very simple performance workflow. So Joe's talk, which I highly recommend, you should go check out, it's for free online. Just Google it, I'm sure you'll find it. It features this performance workflow as applied to an application he built called Cran Whales. And in this demo, he shows that this cyclical flow can be leveraged to turn a prototype into an application that is actually, under his definition, production ready. Many prototypes fall over in production because they contain performance anti-patterns. So by applying Shiny load test and ProfViz, you can help answer the question, is this application fast enough for production? And if it isn't, what's the cause of that? You'll notice that there are step 3, some steps for optimizing and solving that problem. And then step 4, of course, is to go back to the beginning and do that exercise all over again until you're fully satisfied that you've answered that question. I'll pause here to say all of this work that goes into making sure you're confident in your own development work is challenging, but it's also challenging to bring that and convince other people that they should trust you with these tasks and goals. So I would say that you should go about developing trust with other groups in your organization by starting to answer some questions, even before those questions get asked. So some questions that I hear from IT groups inside of organizations tend to be, what is a Shiny application? What is R? Who is going to be the audience for this? What is your service level agreement definition? This is often abbreviated as SLA, and that means like when this thing breaks, who is going to take care of it? What does your analytic architecture look like today? What are your goals for evolving that architecture? How will this thing be monitored and handled? And who is responsible for the maintenance? So what does production mean can kind of be extended using these questions to some different levels. Production means that you're trying to keep this thing running. Unplanned outages are rare or non-existent. You want it to be safe. Data, functionality, code, they all need to be kept safe from unauthorized users. It needs to be correct. This thing needs to work as intended, and it needs to provide the right answers. And it also needs to be snappy. There needs to be fast response times, and the ability to predict needed capacity for expected traffic has to be in place. So in order to achieve all of that, the DevOps philosophy would say a way to go about this is to make your work visible, make sure that other teams know you are doing this, define shared goals if you need to work with other teams, to build a checklist that goes back into making work visible almost, and then to iterate through this process as you develop trust along the way. I've created some shared goals that I really like to talk about here in my own ARM production journey. But at Rstudio, we've developed a number of really interesting open source packages, some of which I've already talked about, Shiny Load Test, Profiz. But there are resources available on our websites for getting into the nitty-gritty of learning how you can use both open source and professional tooling to achieve a number of these goals and concepts. So a couple of my favorite goals here along the side are to embrace testing. So that would be reduce the risk of deploying a breaking change. And then once you've embraced testing, make it joyful, make it automated. Improve your daily work by not having to remember to do your testing. And finally, my absolute favorite is to shorten the distance between development and production by getting yourself a sandbox. And I love talking about this because I think it is incredibly important for admins and our product developers to advocate for a sandbox publishing environment. Not only do you shorten the distance between development and production, and by that I mean you are trying to create a safe place for you to test deployment of your concepts, of your prototypes into an environment that is okay for you to use, but closely mimics your production environment, the place where your application will eventually live. But it's also just a great practice because it gets your prototype off of your own environment, your own laptop sooner, so that it doesn't turn into like a big scary mess that is never going to make it off of your laptop. And this is a really powerful way to start framing and start becoming a better R developer. I love this quote from Jeff Geerling. It's from the book Ansible for DevOps, and it has nothing to do with developing R code or R production at all, but it really encapsulates why having these types of environments at your fingertips is important. He says, when developers begin to think of infrastructure as part of their application, stability and performance become normative. And I've used this quote for the past 2 years over and over again because I love it so much. I also love writing about sandboxes and learning environments. Sometimes I write about ones that cost $0 even. One of my favorite tools for playing around with tinkering with Linux environments for $0 is called VirtualBox. It makes it really easy to spin up pre-built virtual machines. Other people like Docker. I've done a lot of Docker myself. It's okay. Another fun trick to a shared goal is reducing the risk of deploying a breaking change. I brought up the idea of testing for this shared goal earlier, but in this idea, I would challenge you to start thinking about decoupling the idea of doing a deployment from a release. So this is another concept from DevOps, that the idea of a deployment is any push of code to an environment, be it a testing environment or production environment. And a release is when that code or feature is actually made available to users. And you can separate these two actions. So by developing these release patterns, you can actually control when users will see or not see the work that you're actively testing and trying out on your production server. So there are a couple different patterns, and I've spoken about these at older conferences, but there are application-based release patterns, which are honestly a bit hard to implement in Shiny, but not doable. And then there are environment-based release patterns, which is a more general way to control and funnel traffic from one version of an application to another. I recommend environment-based release patterns, honestly, if you're going with Shiny. But these could be different for different types of our development, models, scripts, lots to play around with here. There are honestly so many cool things to learn and incorporate into data science production work from DevOps. And I've only had time to cover just a handful here. But this is a slide I put together from this book called the DevOps Handbook. It talks about these 3 principles and how you can incorporate the ideas of accelerating flow, utilizing feedback and learning and experimentation, which I think all really fit very well with how data scientists think about doing their work anyway. And so I would encourage you to, if you haven't, read a little bit about DevOps philosophy and the discipline, because there's just so much interesting concepts to be had there. So here's my first call to action. Go off and read. I put together a bookshelf on the Goodreads site that you can visit if you want to know what my favorite books about DevOps are, but there are so many to choose from, and they're all very interesting. 2 of these on this list are actually novelizations. So the Unicorn Project that I referenced earlier, and the Phoenix Project, which is a companion novel and actually written before the Unicorn Project, talking about DevOps transformations in organizations. My second call to action, and my last one here, is to join the community. If you have the capacity to be an empathetic witness to someone else who is going through an R production journey, I highly recommend joining us on our Rstudio community forum, community.rstudio.com. The solutions engineering team also produces their own work on solutions.rstudio.com, so you can go there to read things and thought pieces and our best practices. And then on Twitter, I've been trying to get this hashtag going for the last 2 years as well. Hashtag radmins are admins. And of course, if you do want to engage with us there in these different forums and help drive the conversation around R and production, I would encourage you to listen, to ask good questions, to never judge, and to never actually advise, but offer up your own experiences there. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had an amazing conference. I hope this was entertaining or offered you some encouragement. And I'd like to thank the organizers once again for having me here. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Kelly, for delivering a very inspiring presentation. I think that's a very nice way to close a conference. So it's just some kind of, yeah, just inspiring. So I recall Joe's definition at the Rstudio conference. If you want, you can join us back in video, Kelly, if you want, so we can see you as well.
Right.
So come on, another round of applause for Kelly. From the It's like a concert. I mean, we don't want an encore from you, but we have some questions that we would like to ask you. And again, while I'm sharing the application window, I would like you to remember how to do so. You go to slide.do and put e-Rum2020 as an event code, and you will get basically pretty much here. So I think now everything works fine. I will start with the first question that got to you, which comes from Barry. So Barry wants to know, have you experienced real consequences when things go wrong, and what could you learn from it?
Yeah, so I would say that in my experience as less as an R developer and more as a software developer, definitely have experienced when things go wrong. Things break all the time, and often there are fire drills for dealing with when things go wrong, and you learn from those fire drills so that you don't have to stay late and work harder to deal with the same problems over and over again. But there are always new problems to be had. So this magical world where everyone has embraced DevOps and everything is taken care of and automated, I don't actually think that is ever fully achievable. You can definitely get into much better, healthier states as you develop products. But yeah, in my experience, I've definitely been involved with more of the broken side of things and less of the magical DevOps side of things.
Okay. I'm gonna hold this question because I would like to ask you on top of this. So how much does it help, or how much does it count the environment where you work on? So is it supportive towards this error, or is it just a punishing environment? So how naughty or how supportive it is, I think it makes a whole difference of the word, but probably you can confirm that or tell me that I'm very wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Different environments are game changers. You can think that you have something that's going to work completely seamlessly in one environment and transition into another and have it all come crashing down. So the closer you can get to the environment that you're actually targeting, if you can replicate that in some sort of smaller way, either locally on your own machine or in a virtual machine, somewhere to have that available, that can be incredibly powerful into getting you up and running faster and to have more faith in what you're actually developing.
Okay, there's another question for you, which is, why is not R trusted as much as Python for production, and how to change that? That's an excellent question.
Yeah, absolutely. We hear that quite a bit. And my theory, I don't know if it's correct, is that Python, having its roots in both data science, but originally closer to software engineering, is just more of a known entity to these IT groups at this stage. They're used to, they've heard of Python, they've maybe worked with it before, so they just trust it more. It's the known entity. R is less known, and we just need to, unfortunately, do a little bit more legwork, lay the groundwork for it to become also a known entity in this field.
Yeah, so we let the exposure of R just grow probably a little bit more, and we're gonna live in a much better world. Okay, that's a very interesting question, which speaks to my heart, which is the fact that in academia we have no real concept of production. All should be done and running by yesterday, and the pressure is very high. Have you got any tips on how to handle this?
Yeah, I would still encourage you to try to expand your definition of what production is for you. So, like I said, at Rstudio, we don't actually do a lot of production data science as maybe traditionally defined by other industries, but we do have our own concept of what production is. And we do build reports and tools, and there is a lot of pressure because we are still a fairly small company to be doing that work quickly and have things work because we want to prove that they can work. So thinking about production in that different framework, like reframing it for yourself, thinking of it more probably in academia as relates to reproducibility, making something production ready for your future self or your future collaborators, or just for reproducibility as a concept in academic science, is going to be a huge step forward in achieving some of these goals. So even doing a little bit of work now to get up to speed on the open source options that you have available to start upskilling your development and trying to incorporate more concepts from reproducibility, learning about Git, learning about testing, learning about documentation, best practices, that can get you a long way.
Yeah, amen. I would just say this, and I hope that all the PIs in STEM that are listening are probably just changing a bit their opinion on what is really to be delivered by tomorrow or yesterday. Okay, I've got one more question for you. What can you do if you do not find your tribe like you did in Rstudio? Frustration might be damn hard to deal with in non-supportive environments. How was your life in Rstudio? Probably.
Yes. So I know that Twitter can be a dangerous place right now. It's not as fun as it used to be, even when you only follow the RStats hashtags. There's a lot going on there. But in 2019, it was a really nice place to make connections.
We know that.
And I hope it will become that again. But going to meetups was huge for me when I discovered that that was an outlet for, trying to find people who also experienced these same problems as I did, and learning about the opportunities that existed, realizing I didn't have to stay at the current jobs that I had, that I had options, and then that there could be other places that were healthier, more psychologically safe for me to work, was a huge deal. And even though we can't go outside necessarily, or we're not supposed to meet in large groups, events like this are incredible, and virtual meetups still exist. So I highly recommend trying to reach out in some small way to see if taking a little bit of action, if putting yourself out there in that tiny way can help drive how you see yourself and what you can be doing in the future to identify that tribe.
Yeah, I can just remark that, say, even if your life is just not that catastrophical, say the community is just a big booster for many things of yours. I don't know how much time we have, but I definitely would like to try and ask you this question. What are the biggest blockers seen in getting tech and IT on board to use R in production, for example, Plumber APIs and Shiny applications, rather than just for analytics?
Yeah, absolutely. IT, it's helpful when you try to engage with them to put yourself in their shoes, to think about what they are trying to solve for. So they're often trying to reduce risk, and they're trying to, not have to support the things that you're asking them to support. They don't want to do more work because you ask them to. So if you can do things up front to try to show them that Plumber, these environments are going to be similar, they're going to work in the similar ways to things that they are familiar and comfortable with, and that you can do the legwork ahead of time on your end to help convince them that the risk is small, then that can go a long way. And one of the tools that you have at your disposal for doing that is actually the Rstudio team. So at any time you want to open up a conversation, either on the community forum or through our sales channel, you can bring in the team I was talking about, Rstudio Solutions Engineering, and we can help facilitate those conversations with IT groups.
Excellent. I've been on that way while we were trying to acquire some professional products, so I just can confirm that. So it's an excellent way to try and define better your needs and see what really you can do with these products. I don't know if we have a little more time, but otherwise, Shiny plus Plumber and Rstudio products versus self-service BI, Tableau, Q-like Sense, Power BI. How to explain to your chief the difference and cost savings between them?
Sure. There are lots of different ways you can go about doing that. Cost is definitely one of them. You just mentioned a bunch of open source tools, and there are open source versions of our professional products that you can get started with and build out proof of concepts with that basically cost nothing except for finding a place to host those things. And if you do go the route of fully supported professional products from Rstudio, they're even still less expensive than those BI tools that you mentioned. From an actual usability and functionality perspective, at Rstudio, we hold very dearly the idea that of championing reproducibility and putting code first full tools into place in organizations. So if you can bet on code, if you can convince them that having reproducibility and code-backed content and assets is the way, hopefully R and the open source tooling around it can help you get there.
Yep. So definitely I'll put my chips on that. So we are running out of time, at least not just for this, but for asking questions, but we will all store these questions. And Kelly, I would like to invite you to the open lounge afterwards, where you will receive these further questions that we didn't manage to answer. And then basically you can keep on answering to them. Or if you want, you can even do it later on a Twitter thread if you want. So whatever suits you best. So otherwise, join us in the open lounge after the whole closing party. And yeah. Great. Thank you again for being so kind and nice and early in the morning. So
thank you. I'll go get some more coffee.
Yes, please do so.